my pop came home one day and he's like, son, Damon, like, I want you to see this. And he's calling me down and he has fair skin and his face was like red, cause he has freckles. And so I was like, I knew something was going on. I thought I was in trouble or something, I come down and I had to be a teenager at the time. I was like 13, 14. And he shows me this check and it has like 5 digits on it. And he's like beaming. And I think he might have had like a steak and, a Glenlivet or something. Cause actually it was probably Doris because Scotch was his thing, and he was just beaming. And I didn't remember that memory until like a few years ago when I was writing Bring Your Worth, where I was like, oh my God, like that's like me when, I did my startup Cuddlr, shortly after you and I talked last. And I did I bootstrapped these 2 startups while I was a stay-at-home dad with my first child, who's now about to turn 8. And I became a founder of So Quotable, my first app that got me to do my first TED Talk. That TED Talk and a couple connections connected me to 2 other guys who were working on something called Cuddlr, which connected people for hugs. It's like 2014, so it's the era of Tinder and Grindr and all that, right? And so, right, a lot's happened, right? It's like a lot can happen in 7 years, right?
Yeah.
And so we end up all connecting. We bootstrap it because we don't know what the hell we're doing. VCs aren't trying to talk to us because, like, you want to do an app for hugs. Within that first week, September of 2014, Cuddlr had 100,000 users and we had 10,000 completed cuddles. And we're on the late night talk shows and the morning shows. We're featured on like the doctors. Shortly, a little bit later that fall, we're on the cover of the New York Times. But most importantly, about 3 months later, we're on the cover of the Wall Street Journal with those little lithograph things of 2 people cuddling and saying that we started the cuddle economy. All that's happening. And then we end up selling it shortly after my son's 2nd birthday. And when my next son, who's now 4, was on his way, and we sold it for a profit. And we didn't become multimillionaires or anything, but we sold it for a profit. And it wasn't until then that I realized that I was doing the exact same thing that my pop did, 25 years before or whatever, when he was showing me this check. I was doing the same thing to my wife and to my kid. And later on for my next kid that came, where it's like, Daddy created this out of scratch. He created out of nothing. So that's my lineage. That's why I talk about lineage so much in Build From Now and the predecessor Bring Your Worth, where it's like there's so many people who want to disconnect from their family. But the thing is that even like I got lots of issues with my family, as you can probably imagine. But that's your first framework. And if you don't understand your first framework, then it's very much like Joseph Campbell, like you're avoiding the cave. You're not answering the call. I had to go back. Again, I was in my 40s when I remember these memories. I had to go back to retrieve those treasures with all the pain and the challenges with my 3 families. It's like, but that beauty of that, like I didn't start doing startups for nothing. And I talk about this in Build From Now in the first chapter about focus, where me doing my 2 startups, I've done 4 TED Talks now and all that stuff while being the primary caretaker of my now 2 kids. It's almost like me trying to understand what my dad might have saw. And then moving forward from that and being like, oh, you can be a present father or be a present guardian or be a present husband or whatever your moniker you want to hold on to, and you can make an impact on the world. I mean, that's literally my first independent book, the one that became a bestseller, the Bite-Sized Entrepreneur, that came out in 2016. The moniker was that the belief you have to sacrifice everything to make your entrepreneurial mark is a myth. And it wasn't until later, after it became a bestseller, after I did 4 more books, that I realized that I was actually connecting in some ways to my dad. And so there's a level of healing that happens when you recognize where you're from. And so, yeah, you kind of opened up a can of worms for me. Like,
yeah, no, I mean, and, yeah, as you might imagine, there's going to be a lot more questions about this. I mean, you already gave me about a dozen questions. So numerous things come from this, and these, as I'm known to do 3 questions into one. The first is, having your biological dad leave, what impact has that had on you as a father and how you're raising your own kids? Two, I think it would be almost ignorant to not talk about race relations during the time that you grow up, particularly because, you actually referenced it. And so I wonder, as an African-American, what your parents taught you about race. What were your own experiences with race growing up and also throughout your career?
Yeah. So let's do the first one. I think the first one's actually easier, believe it or not. I think my dad leaving or not being involved in our family, I should say it like that, because I'm still cool with him. It was just too much for him. I think, just to be honest, and me realizing that the responsibilities that we have are based on the resources that we have. And often when we neglect our responsibilities or we shy away from them, it's often because we undervalue the resources that we currently have at the moment. I mean, this kind of circles back to Build From Now. I mean, literally the subtitle, How to Know Your Power, See Your Abundance, and Nourish the World. Like that subtitle is like on purpose, where it's like, you're not going to be able to handle everything, but you can handle some of everything. And there tends to be, when we get scared or when we feel overwhelmed, there tends to be fight, flight, or as they've added now, freeze, or all three, which I've experienced all three. And so if I can help people understand the resources that they have that are in an abundance, then they can make an impact. You and I think in our conversation 7-8 years ago, I think we talked about perfection. And I think that kind of gets into this whole thing where it's like, I'm not going to, well, I'll give an example to be more direct with the question. I'm not going to be a parent until everything's perfect. Man, I've had 2 kids. I've been married for several years. Like, if I waited for everything to be perfect, then I wouldn't be married. I probably wouldn't be in a relationship at all. I definitely wouldn't have any kids. And so you work with whatever you've got and trusting that you'll figure it out along the way and getting that support or creating that support around you. I don't think he had that. And so that overwhelmingness, as well as perhaps the level of perfection and idealism might be even a kinder word, I think that prevented him from being fully present. I know that that's something that he struggled with over the years. And I have sympathy now. I was angry for a very long time, but I have sympathy now, particularly now that I'm a father. And again, I'm in my 40s, so my perspective is a little bit different. I get it. I'm looking at more like lineage. And then that's what I talk about in Build From Now, where those scars, those challenges, which number one, the fact that I can talk to you and thousands of strangers about it, like that's reflective of my healing, where I wouldn't be able to talk about that before with that level of honesty. But in looking at those scars and those challenges, I also understand where my strengths come from. And I was just literally just talking to my son about it yesterday, where, 7-year-olds they ask these amazing questions. And as a journalist, it's like, I was like, where'd that come from? And he was like, Dad, like, can you, he was like, I have a serious question. So he got real serious. I'm like, okay. And he said, how do you erase bad memories? Of course I'm thinking about Eternal Sunshine, which is one of my favorite movies and all that stuff.
That's hilarious. I was thinking the exact, funny enough, I've never seen it, but that was about the first thing that came to mind.
Sharina, you'd love it. Like it's, okay. and I love, I forget the director's name. It's a French name, but I love his work anyway, but I think you'd really appreciate it. It's worth doing that this weekend. But what I explained to him, which is actually the premise of the movie, I'm not spoiling anything for you. It's just the setup is that you can't have, number one, there's no good or bad memories. They're just memories. They are what they are. If you take a page out of Stoicism, it's just, that's what happened, right? So that's number one. But then number two, if you erase the bad memories, and you're also erasing the good memories too. And so if I were to say, me and my stepfather have always had a complicated relationship, so I'm not going to think about him anymore. But then I can still remember the look on his face when he really earned income as an independent. I can remember that. That was like, now it's like 30 years ago. So if I erase the so-called bad memories of us having conflicts and challenges when I was growing up, then I also erase that moment. And I'm drawing back on that moment again when I sold Cuddlr, 5, 6 years ago, that was a direct lineage